After Benjamin Franklin discovered in the early 1700s that lightning is made up of electric matter, it became clear that lightning strikes can occur anywhere and at any time, affecting nearly anyone. These are the top 10 lightning strikes that astonished the world in earlier times. 1. Thomas Jarvis was talking with his friend about the ferocity of the storm when a sudden clap of thunder struck, resulting in the death of their neighbor. On the evening of Wednesday, June 23, 1880, a fierce thunderstorm swept through the West Oxfordshire village of Over Norton. Thomas Jarvis was at his neighbor George Payne's house discussing the storm's intensity when a particularly loud clap of thunder reverberated through the building. Accompanied by a bright flash of lightning, the noise prompted them to rush to the window. Outside Payne's door, they discovered the lifeless body of their neighbor, 37-year-old loom weaver Edwin Betteridge. Although Betteridge was breathing, he was described as quite insensible. With the help of another neighbor, Thomas Jarvis, they carried Betteridge into the house. They observed no visible injuries on his body, but by the time a surgeon was called from Chipping Norton, Betteridge had passed away. The following morning, the surgeon, Mr. Mowbray Jackson, returned to conduct a more thorough examination. He observed significant discoloration extending from Betteridge's left ear, down his back and legs, to his calves. The jury at the inquest ruled the cause of death as lightning strike, and both the jury members and witnesses chose to donate their fees to Betteridge's widow. 2. William Harrison Hanna, killed by a stroke of lightning while sleeping. On a fateful night in history, the tranquility of a summer evening was shattered by a fierce storm that would claim the life of a well-respected local attorney, William Harrison Hanna. At 46 years old, Hanna was not just any lawyer. He had deep roots in the community, tracing his legal practice back to the era of Abraham Lincoln and the 8th Judicial Circuit. On August 5, 1870, just before midnight, an unusual electrical display illuminated the sky, casting eerie shadows over the town. In their cozy bedroom at 209 East Grove Street, now the site of the Beck Memorial Home, William and his wife, Frances, were asleep, blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck their home with a blinding flash and a deafening crack, leaving Frances in shock but miraculously unharmed. When the lightning struck, it seemed to envelop William in a strange stillness. Frances, dazed but determined, quickly gathered her thoughts and called for help. The minutes felt like hours as she awaited the arrival of a physician. Tragically, by the time the doctor reached their home, William was barely clinging to life. He gasped for breath, his body seemingly unscathed except for faint marks on his shoulder and chest, signs of the violent electrical discharge that had taken him. The home was intact, with no signs of fire or destruction, yet the life of a devoted husband and esteemed lawyer was extinguished in an instant. 3. While many in the 1700s feared the threat of lightning strikes, there is at least one remarkable story of a man who experienced what many believe to be a miraculous cure following such an event. This incident revolves around a 45-year-old reverend named Mr. Winder. Known for his robust health and cheerful demeanor, Winder was a beloved figure in his community, often seen with a serene expression that reassured those around him. However, his life took a dramatic turn when he suddenly collapsed from his chair one day, stricken by a debilitating palsy. For more than a year, he battled this affliction, which left him weak and unable to perform his usual duties, casting a shadow over his once vibrant spirit. On the evening of August the 24th, 1762, as Winder settled into bed, the weather shifted ominously. The sky darkened with heavy clouds, and a gentle breeze transformed into a violent storm. Thunder rumbled ominously, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the room. Suddenly, a deafening boom jolted him awake, and he felt an extraordinary sensation. Winder described it as a powerful, universal shock, akin to being struck by thunder itself. Miraculously, after this jolt, he found himself revitalized. From that moment onward, he experienced a complete restoration of health. Incredibly, doctors who examined him after the incident declared him cured, attributing his recovery to the electrifying event. The transformation left his friends and family astounded, and his story quickly spread through the community, becoming a testament to the mysterious power of nature and the possibility of miraculous healing. Winder resumed his duties with renewed vigor, his cheerful disposition restored. 4. Watertown girls were struck and killed by lightning while in their bedrooms. In March 1886, 2 girls from Watertown tragically lost their lives to lightning while in their bedrooms on French Street. On Saturday, March 20th, Waterbury and the surrounding area experienced an unusual electrical disturbance for this time of year. Typically, lightning is associated with warmer weather, but that night, after an earlier mix of snow and rain, a fierce storm erupted just after nightfall. Though the rain was minimal, the lightning flashed and the thunder rumbled, starting gently at 11:20 p.m. and intensifying to a terrifying peak by 1:20 a.m., startling even the deepest sleepers. At 12:10 a.m., a foreboding clap of thunder shook the ground as if a heavy object had fallen from above. The major thunderclap followed an hour and 10 minutes later, resembling the sound of multiple artillery batteries firing, accompanied by a tremor that felt like a collision with another world. Houses trembled, dishes rattled on their shelves, and window sashes quivered as if affected by an earthquake. William McGaffey and his family have been living in the lower part of a house in Watertown, known as the Old Truman Dayton Place, which is currently owned by Samuel Dayton. This residence is located just below the Watertown Railroad Station on the east side of the tracks, close to the corners of the old cemetery. The upper portion of the house is occupied by Bag Master Clarence Cook of the Naugatuck Railroad, along with his wife and child. The house is built in a traditional style with sturdy oak timber that has endured severe storms. That evening, the families went to bed as usual, with 2 of the McGaffey daughters, Sarah and Eliza, sharing a room. When a storm began to brew around midnight, the family felt little concern. However, at around 1 a.m., a blinding flash of lightning struck the old Dayton homestead with devastating consequences. The bolt ripped through the house, damaging the plaster in every room except Mr. Cook's. In the room where the 2 sisters were sleeping, the entire side was thrown 15 feet away. Tragically, Sarah, who was 20 years old, was instantly killed, while Eliza, just 18, suffered severe injuries and lived for only about 45 minutes. The remaining family members were quickly alerted and gathered in the room. Mr. Cook had begun to head downstairs when he noticed that the house was on fire. Thankfully, he had a pitcher of water in his room and managed to extinguish the flames, preventing the tragedy from escalating further. He then rushed to assist the McGaffey family below. The bodies bore a horrific appearance, as though they had emerged from a raging furnace. The flesh was so severely burned that it took 7 men to lift Sarah's body without causing further damage, while her hair was singed and her clothing charred. 5. For some reason, this is the only man on the list who has survived 7 separate lightning strikes. Roy Cleveland Sullivan. Roy Sullivan was an American park ranger in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, born on February 7, 1912 in Greene County, Virginia. As a result of surviving 7 lightning strikes, he earned the nicknames Human Lightning Conductor and Human Lightning Rod. His first lightning strike occurred in April 1942 when he sought refuge from a thunderstorm in a newly constructed fire lookout tower that lacked a lightning rod. Reports indicated that the tower had been struck 7 to 8 times. From inside, Sullivan recounted that fire was jumping all over the place. He then sprinted out of the burning tower, only to be struck by lightning a few feet away. The strike burned a half-inch strip along his right leg, hit his toe, and left a hole in his shoe. He was struck again in July 1969, this time while driving his truck along a mountain road. Normally, the metal body of a vehicle serves as a Faraday cage, protecting occupants from lightning strikes. However, in this instance, the lightning first struck nearby trees and was redirected through the open window of the truck. The strike knocked Sullivan unconscious, singed off his eyebrows and eyelashes, and ignited his hair. The truck continued to roll uncontrollably until it came to a stop near the edge of a cliff. In July 1970, Sullivan was struck by lightning while in his front yard. The bolt hit a nearby power transformer and then jumped to his left shoulder, causing severe burns. In the spring of 1972, while working inside a ranger station in Shenandoah National Park, Sullivan was struck by lightning once more. The strike ignited his hair, prompting him to try to extinguish the flames with his jacket. He then hurried to the restroom but couldn't fit under the water tap, so he used a wet towel instead. Although he had never been a fearful person, after this fourth strike, he began to feel as though some force was intent on destroying him, leading to a newfound fear of death. For months afterward, whenever he encountered a storm while driving his truck, he would pull over and lie down on the front seat until it passed. He also became convinced that he would attract lightning even in a crowd, carrying a can of water with him in case his hair caught fire. On August 7, 1973, while patrolling the park, Sullivan noticed a storm cloud developing and quickly drove away. However, he later remarked that it felt as though the cloud was following him. When he finally believed he had escaped it, he decided it was safe to exit his truck. Moments later, he was struck by a lightning bolt. Sullivan reported that he actually saw the bolt that hit him. The lightning traveled down his left arm and left leg, knocking off his shoe, before crossing to his right leg just below the knee. Despite being conscious, Sullivan crawled back to his truck and poured the can of water he always kept there over his head, which was on fire. The following strike, on June 5, 1976, injured his ankle. He reported seeing a cloud that seemed to be pursuing him, and despite his attempts to escape, he was struck again. His hair also caught fire during the incident. On June 25, 1977, while fishing in a freshwater pool, Sullivan was struck by lightning. The bolt hit the top of his head, igniting his hair, and then traveled down, burning his chest and stomach. As he turned toward his car, something surprising happened. A bear approached the pond and attempted to steal trout from his fishing line. Despite his hair being on fire, Sullivan summoned the strength and courage to strike the bear with a tree branch. He later claimed that this marked the 22nd time he had hit a bear with a stick in his life. All 7 strikes were documented by R. Taylor Hoskins, the superintendent of Shenandoah National Park. However, Hoskins was never present during any of the reported incidents and was not actively supervising the park for much of the time that Sullivan was supposedly struck. Sullivan himself recalled that his first lightning strike occurred much earlier than 1942. As a child, while helping his father cut wheat in a field, a thunderbolt struck the blade of his scythe without harming him. However, since he couldn't provide proof of this event later, he never claimed it. Additionally, Sullivan's wife was struck by lightning once when a storm unexpectedly rolled in while she was hanging clothes in their backyard. Her husband was assisting her at the time, but managed to escape without injury. On the morning of September 28, 1983, Sullivan passed away at the age of 71 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, ER6. Mary Smith got struck while ironing. On Saturday, June 14, 1766, a dark cloud suddenly appeared, followed by intense lightning and thunder. Mary Smith, the wife of James Smith, was ironing clothes at a table near where the lightning struck, her back to the chimney and a box iron in hand. She was knocked to the ground and showed no signs of life for half an hour. It took over 2 hours for her to regain the ability to speak. Her right eye was severely affected, rendering her unable to see out of it for several days. The lightning traveled down her face, leaving no visible mark, then moved between her breasts, wrapped around her left breast, and continued down her side, exiting on the upper part of her thigh. The path of the lightning was marked by numerous blisters, some severe enough to cause lasting ulcers. For a considerable time, she was unconscious and remained intermittently disoriented until the following Wednesday. Although she has since improved, she still experiences pain in her shoulders and chest, but her recovery now seems certain. That night after the incident, she vomited a substance resembling melted sulfur mixed with gunpowder, which emitted a strong sulfuric odor. The box iron she was using showed no signs of the lightning, but a pair of sleeve buttons were missing. James Smith, who was sitting on the workbench, felt as though he had been struck across his thighs, but there were no marks left behind. He found it difficult to get up without help. A young man lounging on a feather bed near where the lightning struck received a sizable bruise above one knee. Meanwhile, a boy around 12 or 13 years old, who was sifting meal near the table, was knocked down and appeared lifeless for about 15 minutes. The lightning singed the hair on the right side of his forehead. The lightning traveled down his face, completely singeing the hair off his right eyebrow and leaving only a few eyelashes intact. It continued down his cheek and along his chin. He developed blisters on his brow and cheek, and the skin along the rest of his face was so badly burned that the outer layer eventually peeled away. From his chin, the lightning moved to his chest, spiraling down through his groin and the outer side of his left thigh until it finally vanished near his hamstring. His chest and thigh were severely burned, with the path of the lightning no wider than an inch, marked by a series of blisters, some quite large, and the resulting ulcers are expected to take a long time to heal. At the time, he was wearing a pair of green breeches, the left thigh of which was shredded by the lightning. 2 metal buttons from the waistband were ripped off, and only a small piece of one was later recovered. The other went missing. 7. A lightning flash killed 21 people in Zimbabwe. The incident involving the 21 individuals struck by lightning in Zimbabwe occurred on December 24, 1975, in a remote village called Nyenga. This tragic event became one of the most notable lightning strikes in history due to the number of casualties involved. During the 1970s, Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, was undergoing significant political turmoil and conflict, with the liberation struggle against colonial rule in full swing. The rural communities were often engaged in agricultural practices, and many were preparing for the festive season. On Christmas Eve, villagers gathered at a local church for a service. The weather that day was typical for the region, with a mix of sun and clouds, but as evening approached, dark clouds began to gather. As the service was underway, a sudden and violent storm struck the area. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed across the sky. In a moment of sheer terror, a bolt of lightning struck the church where the villagers had gathered. The strike resulted in the deaths of 21 individuals, while many others sustained injuries. The victims were primarily women and children, with reports indicating that some were killed instantly, while others suffered severe injuries that later contributed to their deaths. 8. Zetter Hoenligher struck by lightning while in jail. Zetter Hoenligher, born in 1788, was a notorious German criminal. He led a gang of robbers that operated from 1817 to 1819 in the border areas of the Kingdom of Württemberg. Standing over 6 feet tall, Hoenligher had a muscular build, and his demeanor reflected his background as a former soldier. His gang's size varied over time, but it consistently included a core group of individuals. In early 1819, the Laubach Mule, a mill located near Ostrach, experienced 6 separate break-in attempts by Zetter and his crew. Each time they sought food supplies. After failing to deter the thieves through patrols, the foresters from Koenigsegwald decided to change their strategy. They set up an ambush at the mill to apprehend Zetter and his gang. On April 16, 1819, during another robbery attempt, the gang was caught red-handed by the foresters. Initially, they fled into the woods but were soon pursued. The foresters later discovered the gang while they were dining in the forest. Following a brief exchange of gunfire, most of the criminals were captured, although a few managed to escape. The captured members were taken to Biberach and detained in various facilities throughout the city. Some were held at the White Tower, while others were taken to the Seal House, an old structure formerly owned by Beguines that the city now used, featuring iron-barred windows on the ground floor. Zetter Hoenligher himself was imprisoned in the Ehingen Tower, alongside several women from his gang. He shared a cell with a suspected member of another outlaw group, and both were heavily shackled. Their chains were secured through a hole in the wall to a chimney. Then, on the evening of July 20th, 1819, a fierce thunderstorm swept over Biberach. Lightning struck the Ehingen Tower, and when the prison doors were opened, thick smoke poured from Hoenligher's cell. He was found dead on his pallet, having been struck by lightning. When his body was removed, his clothing ignited. Attempts to revive him were in vain due to the severity of his injuries. The right side of his chest down to his waist was completely charred, and the inner part of his right upper arm was severely damaged, with skin missing from his elbow to his hand. An investigation into his death revealed that the lightning first struck the weather vane, causing significant damage to the roof and chimney, before traveling down the chimney and striking Hoenligher directly, with the iron chain acting as a conductor. Zetter Hoenligher was buried in the Poorhouse Cemetery on July 21, 1819. His grave has since been leveled. 9. Martha Warman was struck and killed by lightning while walking. At the time, rumors circulated widely, fueled by gossip and speculation, that Martha had faced punishment for her so-called immodest behavior. Whispers in the village suggested that her actions had drawn the ire of the community, with some claiming that her attire and demeanor were inappropriate by the standards of the day. This perception led many to believe that her misfortunes were a direct consequence of her perceived moral failings. As the gossip spread, it became a topic of heated discussion in local gatherings, where people exchanged their opinions, often embellishing the story further, reinforcing the idea that Martha had brought her troubles upon herself through her alleged indiscretions. In June 1832, Martha was strolling near Ardington with two young men when a sudden lightning strike from an unexpectedly stormy sky knocked the men to the ground and instantly killed Martha Dott. According to eyewitness, Martha was wearing a bonnet which was reinforced with wire, which seemed to function as a lightning rod. One of the two men recalled that the lightning struck her bonnet, coursed through her body, and in the process, ripped her stockings and damaged her boots as the electric current exited her. 10. A violent storm struck Eastbourne, Sussex around 9 a.m. in September 1780, causing extensive damage to James Adair of Soho Square and his staff. Adair had leased a house for his family and was watching the storm through a window, his hands clasped together. Suddenly, a powerful flash of lightning forced his hands apart, throwing him several yards across the floor onto his back, with his legs raised in the air for an extended period. Although he was aware of his situation, he was unable to open his eyes, speak, or move any part of his body. When help arrived, they discovered that the blue cloth of his clothing was severely damaged. The right sleeve of his coat and waistcoat, as well as his shirt, were torn open from the shoulder to the wrist. The right side of his breeches sustained similar damage, and the brass buttons were partially melted. Adair's right arm, side, and thigh were scorched, with his flesh badly torn. His shoes were ripped in several places, and one of his toes was nearly split to the bone. A button from his sleeve was broken and missing. In one of his right side pockets, he carried a key and a penknife, both of which showed signs of fusion. The window through which he had been observing the storm was completely shattered, and a door opposite was also destroyed. On the floor beneath him lay his butler, coachman, and footman. The butler, who had been holding a telescope when the lightning struck, was left unharmed but found his telescope in ruins, and his wig and hat were tossed some distance away. He reported feeling a violent pressure on his skull and back, but otherwise remained unscathed. The coachman, standing about a yard away from the butler, was not as fortunate. He was struck dead while attempting to open a glass door, his body charred. The footman, who had been grooming his hair near a window, was also killed instantly. He was found scorched and bruised, with a large wound near his heart and his buckskin breeches ripped, with a metal knee buckle driven through them.